I'm really excited to introduce our first guest to this podcast. Thank you, Chris.
Morning.
For coming along. Chris is definitely in the L&D royalty category. We're going to do a bit of a mini This Is Your L&D Life shortly.
Excellent.
For
No pressure.
our guests' benefit here. But Chris, you're here today to talk about all things communication. So that's in a
Indeed.
hybrid, remote and cross-cultural context. You're currently the L&D manager for Nestella.
Yeah, looking at people development for our employee groups all across the world, which is very exciting, if not challenging remit.
Yes, and that's a global role, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So from a communication standpoint, we're looking at everything from territories in the UK to Asia Pacific to the Americas.
And of course, you were promoted in that role quite recently, so congratulations.
Thank you very much.
From a company in the group, isn't that right? You start with Evaluate and you promote to the global role 3 months ago?
Feels a lot longer, but I think calendar-wise, yes, 3 months ago. Yeah, I think that's about right. But yeah, no, looking at initially just one of the companies, and then as a group we've grown, and the learning and development function has taken, which I think is a positive step, taking that central role at a global level. So we look at harmonizing people development rather than insulating it or siloing it, which I think is a good way.
And just for your current role, what regions, just so our audience are aware, are you responsible for? Especially, we're going to talk about cross-cultural communication shortly. I know you could do a lot of work with America.
So L&D, we do everything. So there's only a team of 4 of us, but we have everything from, well, the majority of employees are US or North America, but we also have UK offices and then offices in Tokyo. We've just opened one in Shanghai, I found out about. So,
great. You found that out.
Yeah,
Great.
found that one out. I was like, okay, good. That's an extra one to visit. So yeah, it's a truly global remit.
Great. And of course, we, for the benefit of people listening or watching in, we met when you were at Lidl.
Yes, I've not just come off the street
Yeah.
and sat down. No. You've not lucked out.
Yeah, I'd be so lucky. People, you were there 16 years. I know you don't look it age-wise,
Yeah.
obviously.
Charmer, yeah.
But we first met, yeah, you were there 16 years. You started at the grad scheme, is that right? And
No, I was there when I was in uni, but no,
Yeah.
I started off as a customer assistant. Just
Yeah.
lectures for 4 hours a day, then go into store. But yeah, no, 16, just over 16 and a half years, and then 7, 8 years in the L&D space,
Yeah.
which was, it was really good being able to join the dots from entry level position all the way to where I ended up, which was exciting.
And I guess with a cross-cultural theme, a German
Yes.
brand, a company, and you were part of the GB team, but obviously lots of exciting things and tips to share we'll come on to.
Yes, I can definitely tell you the mistakes I made for sure. That's that can happen.
The title's Live and Learn, so that's perfect.
Excellent. There
That's
we go.
why you're here.
Oh, good. Sounds like a therapy session.
A very budget therapy session, I think. I think if people wouldn't pay for therapy sessions for me, I think. So this episode, we're going to talk about navigating cross-cultural communication in a global context. I think we've just briefly talked about your time at Lidl. You're currently in a global role with Nocella as well. What would your advice be when you're tackling a global role and the challenges you've kind of faced?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many pitfalls that you can fall into, but I would say don't underestimate the just take the time, really. Don't underestimate the conversations you can have with people. Don't make assumptions. That's where it can go really, really wrong. And I think it's definitely take the time to understand your team, whether it is the team that you lead or whether it is a project team you're part of, even just a global department with functions all over the world. But yeah, I don't underestimate the time it'll take to just speak to people, find out what people need, find out what people want. There'll be many situations where you assume, oh, this person, because of the area they live in, will prefer a more direct form of communication. They'll prefer email, they'll prefer written. And culturally, yes, that's a stereotype. Culturally, it may be correct. But there's still people you deal with. So just ask them. And I think there's a lot of fear behind that. Oh, no, we can't ask. I'm the leader. I should know this. Or they're my colleague, they're my peer. It's not appropriate for me to ask. I think in this day and age, people expect it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that for me is the key takeaway. Is just speak to people and don't underestimate the power of that first question. How do you want to interact with me?
It seems quite a fair question to ask, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we touched on this. You mentioned stereotypes there. There's tons of models out there. We've got some videos on those things. There's kind of linear, non-active types. There's obviously stereotypes about certain cultures. Have you found, have they been true? Is there some bits in that? Is that helped or hindered you? You mentioned there about, you treat people as individuals quite
Yeah.
lightly. What, again, and you've run from Lidl, which is, a Germanic company, as you said, to now a more US company.
Mhm.
How has that stereotype, truth or not truth, worked, I guess, in your experience in L&D?
I think that there's definitely differences in culture
Yep.
going from the countries that I've operated in in my previous life to versus where I am now. But there's also time zone differences that impact those stereotypes, which you wouldn't necessarily think of.
Yeah.
I would say when I was in Lidl, I was very much, it was more email driven when it was outside of the country.
Okay.
But when I was communicating with people within the UK, pick up a phone. Very, very good on informal communication. But then generally speaking, when you were emailing outside of the country or your project teams were across Europe, it was very difficult to just get everybody on a phone call.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
emails or calendar invites made more sense. Working more with my colleagues in the US now, they are very much more informal communication via MS Teams. But due to the time zone difference, we only have about a 4 to 5 hour overlap.
The window, yeah.
Yeah.
To communicate.
And that's only with the East Coast. When California comes online, I've shut down.
Yeah,
Because that's an
absolutely.
even bigger time difference. So that communication is, even though they prefer informal, nothing gets done.
Yeah, and you've got boundaries as well, because
Yeah.
they might want to send you a WhatsApp or whatever or something like that.
Exactly.
And it could be 8 p.m. on a Friday for you, and you're out and about. And,
Exactly. It's not appropriate for me to discuss this in the middle of a bar.
Yeah.
I'll send you an email on Monday. Thanks.
Yes.
So yeah, it's even if you've got the informal approach, the time zone for that doesn't help. And then equally dealing with my colleagues in the APAC region. So from our Tokyo office, for example, there's a 30-minute overlap for us.
Yeah.
And then they shut down.
Yeah.
So that has to be email communication. It's very difficult to plan face-to-face communications or messaging or this, that, and the next thing. So, but they're also very good culturally at the end. The end of my day is the end of the day.
Good. Okay.
Whereas North America are happy to overrun.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So that's, yeah, you've got the cultural differences there, but the time zone definitely impacts how you can communicate or how I can communicate, and email is the default, unless it's in the window, in which case my Teams is going like Piccadilly Circus. It's just mental for that one.
So when you've got these windows, do you have to put those windows, just I guess practical tips here for people maybe starting a global role, do you block that time out because you know that you're going to get maybe flooded with emails for that window? Is there been any kind of miscommunication via email? There's obviously people can get more offended or read the wrong end of the stick,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think since coming out of the pandemic, everyone has become a lot better at diary management.
Yep.
Because that's the only way you can find people.
You've had to be.
Yeah, exactly. And with that, everyone puts blocks in the diary to get work done so people can't force meetings in.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when you're scheduling meetings with people, you don't phone them or you don't email them to say, give me your availability, because you can see it in, the scheduling system, for example, in Outlook and other platforms are also available. It's not a Microsoft plug. But with that, people don't ask your availability. They can see it, so they just put a meeting in. I think we've all become a lot better at blocking out time. But yeah, definitely with with moving into the global role, I'm aware I try to not keep my afternoons busy.
Yeah.
I try and leave space in there as much as possible, because that's when I can speak to, well, my new team. I can't speak to them other than that. But also that's when tight deadlines come around. You know, when you're in the same office, it's really easy to speak to someone sitting next to you across the office and going, I'm really, really, really sorry, because you can do it in person, or even you can message them on Teams and you can have that, I'm really, really sorry, I know this is last minute, but are you able to turn this around for me in 2 hours? That happens. But it also happens with my colleagues in the US.
I was going to say that happens, everywhere. That's the thing.
Exactly. So, but if I block out my entire day from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 p.m, Chris, this is an emergency. Yeah, sorry. Oh, I can't tackle it. I'm back to back in meetings. So I purposely keep a few hours free. Yeah, otherwise it just doesn't allow it for that flexibility and that freedom of communication and collaboration.
And I guess we've got some content on out of sight, out of mind when you're working remotely. You mentioned that you've got different windows, and I think there's a good top tip there on prioritizing some free time and
Yeah.
anticipating things in advance, maybe. But you said at the top here we've got different windows. So is it not subconsciously certain regions will get less airtime or
Mhm.
treatment because they've got a half an hour window, and West Coast, East Coast has got 4 hours, like you said. How do you do that from, I guess, with your own internal team, people you manage, but also any L&D programs you roll out?
Mhm.
How do you kind of keep that all level?
Yeah, and I think out of sight, out of mind is a perfect analogy in this environment of hybrid working. It's so easy to either think of the situation you're in, or if you're maybe a permanent remote worker, so easy to put yourself in the situation that you personally are in, and not. It's very difficult to think outside your own bubble.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not programmed to think that way. Yeah, one of the I did learn that lesson the hard way when I started in Evaluate, rolling out a full L&D learning library that I had built was great. Did the launch communications for it, which were just
Great, yeah.
emails, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. But then I decided, right, well, that's self-directed learning. Everyone, I'm empowering employees to learn on their own back, fine. But what if they need help? What if they need to understand? So I organized then drop-in sessions.
Yeah, great.
And thought, if you
Good
want,
idea on the surface. Yeah,
yeah, it's
absolutely.
like, perfect. If you want help on time management, I'll block out an hour and a half. Published all the times. It was great. Made sure I had done them for afternoon UK, morning East Coast. Thought, okay, that's fine. And then out of the blue, I had someone email me from Tokyo, Chris, can we come on live? I'm like, uh-oh. It's like 2:00 in the, I need to reschedule this. Oh no. So in that instance, it's physically impossible to have East Coast, US,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Europe and Tokyo all in the same call without having someone sitting in their pajamas. And as the trainer, I didn't think it was appropriate that I was in my pajamas. So what I did is that lesson was, okay, I have to do everything twice.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's not an efficient way of working. It kind of went against my 16 years in Lidl.
Yeah.
We're a very efficient way of working.
Back at Germanic,
Yeah, exactly. This is very defined processes as well. So that kind of went against that thinking. But the importance of, and lesson one you always learn L&D is put your end user first. And going, yeah, okay, fine. It's 2 times an hour and a half for me, so it's 3-hour resource for me. But it's for the end user. They need help with this. They need help in understanding it and how to apply it. So it's actually not a resource requirement, it's an investment for me to invest in this area of the business, which will drive, I don't know, revenue, data analytics, whatever the function is that they do. It's not just learning, it's everything. If I'm rolling out an L&D initiative, it's taking that step back.
Yeah, that's my next bit I was going to mention is, so you want to roll anything at scale. So you have to then factor in maybe doing some things twice, basically.
Yeah, doing some things twice, but also recognizing the different areas. The majority of my new team, so the global L&D function, the brands that they've come from, they only have offices in the US. So when we're looking at leadership programs or whatever, I'm saying, right, well, how does this impact Tokyo? For me, that's now default because I spent 1 year in Evaluate thinking of the 3 regions. They've never had an office in Tokyo before. They've never had an office outside of the US. So for them, it's this is a learning curve. This is right. We need to. So they've now got, warning signs on things. Have you thought about Japan? Have you thought about APAC? So yeah, but it goes back to what is it you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
That very first stage in the learning cycle is what is the deep dive analysis. What are the skill gaps that you're trying to fill? And actually, when you start looking cross territory, when you start rolling out, is it the content that's most important, or is it the end goal that's most important? And if it's the end goal, then you've got that flexibility across your territories to say, okay, I'll do a base level, but beyond that, you guys can crack on.
Yeah.
Or if it's quite an important topic, this has to be controlled. This has to have a bit more measure of control. So I'm going to have to do this 3, 4, 5 times for the time zones area.
Yeah, because I think that was a really good question. Lots of our customers always ask is, you've got a global team managing upwards and your team as well. but also global audience in terms of people you're looking to train or
Yeah.
prove their skills. And it's getting that balance, isn't it, between you've got so it sounds like your advice is mapped to the skills, and depending on that, each region is allowed to have their own interpretation of the program if you're rolling out a global L&D program, say.
Yeah.
But sometimes it sounds like there's a flexibility. It could be this standardized throughout, or could sometimes be there's a bit of give there between regions. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
definitely. Because the other thing as well is you've got natural territory differences, not
course.
just cultural, but you'll have natural differences in
Maybe
territories.
embrace them maybe then.
Yeah, exactly. And you have, I mean, if, you look at, the storming, norming, performing.
Yeah.
You guys, we've got the videos for that in Video Arts. You
Yeah,
can learn
yeah.
all about how to storm, norm, and perform.
Spot on.
Yeah, exactly.
Great plug as well.
Yeah, there you go. You can learn all about that, but actually, how that works in practice across different territories will be very, very different because,
Yeah, of course.
people. Well, we all learn differently anyway, but culturally, it'll be different at the same time. So there's a lot more at a cross cultural or global communication level. There's a lot more flexibility than when you've got one office in the city centre of Sheffield or something. It's very different things you have to consider.
Yes, no, some really good practical tips there. And I guess in terms of navigating that cross-cultural team in this episode, there's also the kind of leadership and management piece. So I think we've touched nicely on there, the L&D itself. But what about managing upwards, maybe the leader or C-suite or your manager, but also the team you've got yourself? Is there any kind of practical tips you would share on those with people kind of watching in?
Well, I think it goes into what your sphere of influence is versus
absolutely.
your sphere of control.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
If you're in a position where you can influence the C-suite, then I think it's almost beyond from an L&D perspective. The first thing we learn is it's all about the end user. The second thing you learn is get a learning champion on the C-suite. If you're able to influence that or even control it, if that's your if that's your boss, then perfect, because that definitely helps. But if you're quite further removed from that level, then it's a bit more difficult to impact it.
Yeah, like maybe an example could be if your boss is based in a different region and maybe you're both online together for 2 hours a day. How do you manage that feeling of you're not being micromanaged, or the opposite? You could feel like you're being left alone too much. And I think people have that often in remote working. It's a blessing and a curse, and I think often people forget remote working is a skill in itself. It's not just a function. So that maybe applies if you've got less time in a global context. You've got a bit less of a luxury sometimes to chat to someone next to you or whatever it may
It's
be.
how you build the relationship with someone, and whether it's managing up, managing down, or even peer-to-peer interaction. If it even across technology, interactions can come across ingenuine, or ingenuous, whichever the word is.
I knew what you meant.
Yeah, my degree wasn't English, sorry. But yeah, so I think building the relationship remotely or virtually is difficult, but you need to invest time as a manager. And I think when it comes to communication, regardless of culture, regardless of territory, regardless of industry, really, we're all people when it boils down to it. And for me, the way I build relationships when I deliver training is being honest about myself. And it's not that you turn it into the Chris show, but it's just you make the odd comment here and there. Oh yes, my kids are annoying, and I know that I have children, but my kids are annoying me.
Hypothetically.
Yes, my hypothetical children. They're annoying me. My partner has done X, Y, Z. Something's happened in the family. I'm working from a different location, and I think just being able to share those little snippets here and there makes you come across more human as a leader, instead of the company logo that is traditionally you're viewed as a leader. And breaking that down allows the other person to open up a little bit more. And
they feel more comfortable themselves to share, don't they?
Exactly. And again, it's not that you want the information because you're building a dossier on them, one would hope. But I'm not here to judge. You do you. But it's, that's how you can then foster and build those relationships. So, and that's what happened with my team in my 3 months working from home. So when we moved into our new offices, there was none of that awkward handshaking and I'm new and this that it was a oh, you do exist in 3D instead of 2. Oh, that's good to know.
Or my example, so it was, oh, you're a lot shorter than I thought you were going to be in person.
Yeah. But you've had that your whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's stuck with it. I'm afraid. Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't put your heels on today. Really,
I've got big trainers on.
Right. Well, then there we go.
I'm 5'9" with them on. I think.
Oh, good.
In the fringe.
big hair and big shoes.
Absolutely.
Sounds like a drag act. I think I've met her.
I think the last bit I kind of had something when we were prepping this was, I guess, looking back to, the podcast Live and Learn and the lessons you had. Maybe just if we just take a step back, any mistakes you made when you started that new role and evaluate after such a long and successful tenure at Lidl, I guess, when you were navigating that kind of global cross-cultural team, what would you, anything you do differently, or any even humorous mistakes, or you look back on that you kind of chuckle on, or it could be at Lidl either, but just in a global context, any funny things you can share or things you would have done differently?
One of the mistakes that I made relatively early on when I joined Evaluate was now I did recognise 16 plus years within Lidl was very much, not only was I a subject matter expert within learning and development, but I was a subject matter expert in the business and how the business had grown in that period.
Like a go-to person, no doubt, as well, for lots of stuff.
Exactly, and I could provide a lot of context to things. Going to that, to being the new person, you're like, okay, you spend you spend your first 1-2 weeks going, what's it we do here? What was it we do? And I think with looping into the topic of communication, one of the mistakes I made was I scheduled a meeting with somebody who was in the US, and I made the assumption they were East Coast, and they weren't. They were Central Time Zone, which is only 1 hour more difference rather than the 8-hour difference with the West Coast. But I was unaware of that. But I was then also unaware that one of the functions they did was commercial enablement, which was supporting the commercial teams and training them. So I then came into this meeting going, right, this is my role, how can I help? And she just looked, I had put it really early in her day, so I don't think the coffee had kicked in, and she just looked down this camera and went, I've got a department that does that. What? I was going, I didn't do enough research for this, I thought you were someone else, this is really, really awkward. So that was a bit of I did play the new person card. I'm new, really sorry. It's fine. And then to be fair, builds a very good relationship.
Yeah, well,
because you're like, Chris is the idiot that phoned me at 7:00 in the morning, and you're like, sorry.
To ask something that was not their job.
That had nothing to do with him, had nothing to do with me. You don't know why we were talking about it. But yeah, that was the lesson from that was research everybody what it is that they do and the scopes of the department. That was a bit embarrassing.
Yes, I guess people watching and listening in, if we're maybe new to L&D or starting a role, and they look at people like yourself, you've got all this experience in lots of different contexts. What would you look back on and kind of say, 20-year-old Chris, what would your first bit of advice be if you were starting L&D now, with what you know now and you've kind of live and learn, I guess?
Well, if I was 20-year-old Chris and I'm starting L&D, I'd tell him where to invest. But from a personal development standpoint, in my experience, not enough emphasis was in my earlier career was given to understanding the crux of the problem, or the situation. And the big lesson I've learned is, and I do a lot of my training sessions when the need arises. I don't just randomly bring it up, but it's either the 5 or 7 whys. And you sound like a petulant toddler. Why? But it really helps drill down to the crux of the problem, and then actually, and I did it a lot now in my new role, and what initially starts off as, this is going to be a really big L&D initiative, turns into, I don't even need to be in this room now, because it's not actually a learning issue, this is it. And I think that definitely would have helped me avoid a lot of issues, but also be a bit more targeted focus for personal resource planning as well.
To just ask why again, basically, why are we doing this?
Exactly. Why are we doing it? And then get through to the problem. That would be if I had my time over, then that would be what I would do. I would do again to really drill down to what it is I'm trying to achieve.
No, but thank you, Chris. That's been really helpful. I mean, I've learned a lot, I think, from it, and thanks for sharing mistakes and good fun and nature as always.
Thanks for the therapy session.
Yeah, people pay good money for that usually. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's great.
But yeah, thanks for joining, sharing your expertise, and being so candid as well. And I'm sure everyone will find that really useful. And yeah, I'll see you soon. And thank you very much again.
All right, thank you.